This notion that everybody gets to do what they want to do, when they want to do it, how they want to do it, feeling whatever way they want to feel. When you got your hand out for other people's money, it doesn't work that way.
Stephen A. Smith didn't hold back after Molly Qerim's shocking ESPN exit, clowning her in a way fans are calling brutal. But here's the thing, what he said isn't just jokes. It hints at a deeper fallout between the two. And the truth about Molly's exit might be far messier than what you've heard. Let's get into it. The shocking departure that rocked ESPN. The sports media world was absolutely stunned on September 15th, 2025, when news broke that would send shockwaves throughout the entire ESPN empire. Molly Qerim, the longtime host of ESPN's flagship show First Take, announced her abrupt resignation from the network after nearly 2 decades with the company. But what started as a simple departure announcement quickly spiraled into one of the most talked about controversies in recent sports media history, with whispers of betrayal, backroom drama, and shocking revelations that would make your head spin. Now, before we dive deep into this explosive story, I need you to understand just how monumental this departure really was. We're not talking about some random ESPN personality deciding to move on to greener pastures. No, this was Molly Qerim, the woman who had been the steady professional anchor of First Take since 2015, the person who had to wrangle debates between some of the most opinionated personalities in sports media, including the king himself, Stephen A. Smith. Qerim's journey at ESPN began way back in 2006, starting in digital and mobile roles before climbing her way up the corporate ladder. She hosted College Football Live, served as a breaking news reporter for Fantasy Football Now, for which she actually won an Emmy in 2008, and eventually became the face that millions of viewers associated with intelligent, measured sports discourse. When she took over as the permanent host of First Take in 2015, replacing Carrie Champion, she didn't just fill a role, she transformed it. Think about what First Take was during her tenure. This wasn't just some random debate show. This was ESPN's crown jewel, their ratings powerhouse, the show that consistently drew hundreds of thousands of viewers every single morning. Under Qerim's stewardship, First Take became ESPN's top-rated program, with her serving as the calm, professional moderator who could keep even the most heated debates on track while adding her own insightful commentary. But here's where things get absolutely wild. The way this departure went down was anything but normal. On September 15th, 2025, Sports Business Journal published a report stating that Qerim would be leaving ESPN at the end of the year after turning down a contract extension. Now, in the normal world of media departures, this would have led to a graceful transition, maybe some farewell episodes, a nice send-off celebration, but that's not what happened here. Instead, what we witnessed was something that can only be described as a media earthquake. Within hours of the Sports Business Journal report, Qerim confirmed her departure via an Instagram story. But here's the kicker. She noted that the news came out earlier than I intended. This wasn't a planned, orchestrated announcement. This was damage control in real time. But the real bombshell came the next morning. On September 16th, 2025, Stephen A. Smith opened First Take solo, and what he said next would become the subject of intense scrutiny and analysis. Now, I want you to pay close attention to the exact words he used, because as we'll discover later in this story, every single word choice matters.
Last night, she abruptly resigned as the host of the show. And to say that I'm quite sad about it is an understatement.
Notice that word, abruptly. This wasn't Stephen A. saying she was leaving at the end of the year as originally planned. No, he's telling the entire world that Molly Qerim quit effective immediately, catching everyone off guard, including him. But Stephen A. didn't stop there. He continued with what appeared to be a heartfelt tribute.
Molly is a friend. Molly is a co-worker. Molly is somebody that I have leaned on many occasions in the past, as she has done when it comes to me.
On the surface, these seem like the words of a concerned colleague, someone genuinely saddened by the departure of a longtime partner. Stephen A. described their professional relationship as a partnership that had lasted 10 years, acknowledging her contributions to the show's success and expressing what appeared to be genuine emotion about her leaving. But here's where things start to get murky, and why this story became such a sensation across social media platforms. Stephen A. Smith, in the same breath, made it clear that he knew more about the situation than he was willing to share publicly.
The details, quite frankly, are none of y'all business, but it's not as if I know all the details. Do I have an idea? Of course I do. Am I going to share it with you? No. Because again, that's her story to tell.
Now, I need you to pause for a moment and really think about this approach. Here you have Stephen A. Smith, a man who built his entire career on being outspoken, on sharing his opinions about everything from LeBron James's legacy to the latest NFL controversy. Yet when it comes to his co-host of 10 years suddenly quitting, he's suddenly become the picture of discretion. Former colleagues and media analysts immediately picked up on the strange tone of Smith's comments. Emmanuel Acho, a former ESPN analyst, didn't mince words when he described Smith's handling of the situation. The criticism was swift and pointed. Why was Stephen A. being so coy and confusing about the entire situation? But what really caught people's attention wasn't just what Stephen A. said that morning on First Take. It was what he said later that day on his SiriusXM podcast, The Stephen A. Smith Show, that would really set tongues wagging and create the controversy we're dissecting today. Later that same day, Smith provided more context on his podcast, revealing additional details about the timing and nature of Qerim's departure. He reiterated that she had resigned the previous night, emphasizing again how sudden and unexpected it was. But more importantly, he confirmed what many had suspected. This was all about money.
There was a contract negotiation that was going on. ESPN certainly did not want to lose her. But in the end, she made a decision to walk away from the show effective immediately.
So there it was, laid out in plain terms. This wasn't about creative differences or wanting to pursue other opportunities or any of the usual corporate speak we hear when media personalities leave networks. This was about cold, hard cash. ESPN wanted to keep Molly Qerim. They made her an offer, and she walked away because the terms weren't acceptable to her. But here's where the story takes its first major twist. ESPN president of content Burke Magnus later clarified that the departure was accelerated due to the Sports Business Journal leak. The original plan had been for Qerim to leave at the end of the year. But once the news leaked, both sides agreed it was better to make a clean break immediately, rather than have 3 months of awkwardness and speculation. Magnus emphasized that there was no controversy here and no shoe that's going to drop, framing the entire situation as a straightforward business disagreement where two parties simply couldn't come to terms. ESPN wanted her to stay in a more versatile role beyond just First Take, but Qerim ultimately decided she wanted to explore opportunities outside the network entirely. Now, as the dust was settling from this initial earthquake, rumors and speculation began flying faster than a LeBron James fast break. Social media was absolutely buzzing with theories about what really went down behind the scenes. Was this really just about money? Were there personal conflicts? Had something happened between Molly and Stephen A. that we didn't know about? Former ESPN analyst Marcellus Wiley threw gasoline on the fire when he suggested that Qerim's exit felt deliberate, possibly intended to highlight tensions or drama behind the scenes. According to Wiley, the abrupt nature of her departure, leaving Stephen A. to handle the show solo, was meant to send a message and draw attention to whatever issues might have been brewing. The timing of certain events also raised eyebrows. On the same day Qerim's departure was announced, ESPN signed Malika Andrews to a new contract, which immediately led to comparisons and speculation about pay disparities among ESPN's female hosts. But perhaps the most telling detail of all was something that many people overlooked in the initial chaos. When Qerim posted her resignation statement on social media, she notably did not mention Stephen A. Smith despite their decade-long partnership and professional relationship. For someone who had worked so closely with him for so long, the omission seemed glaring and potentially significant. As September 16th turned into September 17th and 18th, the sports media world was still trying to make sense of what had happened. ESPN announced they would be conducting a 45-day search for Qerim's replacement, with various personalities filling in on an interim basis. Names like Monica McNutt and Colleen Wolfe were being floated as potential successors, while fans took to social media to express their shock and, in many cases, their support for Qerim's decision to leave. But little did anyone know that the biggest bombshell was yet to come, because while everyone was focused on the departure itself and the immediate aftermath, Stephen A. Smith was preparing to make comments that would completely change the narrative and turn this story from a simple contract dispute into one of the most controversial moments in recent sports media history. What he said next would be interpreted by many as a direct shot at his former co-host, a subtle but devastating critique that would have fans, media personalities, and industry insiders questioning everything they thought they knew about the relationship between these two media powerhouses. And that, my friends, is where our story truly begins to get interesting. The shade heard around the sports media world. If you thought the initial departure was dramatic, you ain't seen nothing yet, because what happened next would transform this story from a simple contract negotiation gone wrong into a full-blown controversy that had everyone from casual sports fans to industry veterans questioning just how deep the drama really went. On September 18th, 2025, Stephen A. Smith appeared on his podcast, The Stephen A. Smith Show, and delivered what many would interpret as a masterclass in throwing subtle shade. Now, I want you to understand something crucial about Stephen A. Smith's communication style. This is a man who has built his entire career on being direct, on saying exactly what he means, on never leaving any doubt about his position on any topic. But what he did on this particular day was different. It was calculated, it was layered, and it was absolutely devastating. Stephen A. started his comments by making it seem like he was moving away from the Molly Qerim topic entirely.
I want to move on to a broader subject in regards to this. And this part is not about Molly.
But here's the thing about Stephen A. Smith. When he says he's not talking about someone, that's usually exactly when he's talking about them. And what followed was one of the most thinly veiled critiques you'll ever hear in sports media.
We don't get to define our own value. We don't get to define our own worth.
Now remember the context here. This is coming just days after his co-host of 10 years walked away from ESPN because she couldn't come to terms on a contract. And Stephen A. is talking about how people don't get to define their own worth. The timing is absolutely not a coincidence. But he didn't stop there. Oh no, Stephen A. was just getting warmed up. He continued with what can only be described as a lecture on leverage and business realities.
Unless you have the leverage to do it. When you heard me at a time when we were discussing my contract negotiations all over the media and all throughout the sports world.
Do you see what he's doing here? He's contrasting his own contract negotiations, where he successfully secured a reported $20 million per year deal, with the situation that just unfolded with Molly. Stephen A. Smith's contract with ESPN is estimated to be worth around $105 million over 5 years, making him one of the highest paid personalities in sports media. And he's using his success as a template for how negotiations should go, while simultaneously suggesting that others might not have the same leverage. The key moment, the one that really sent shockwaves through the sports media world, came when Stephen A. delivered this brutal assessment.
What I talked about was what my worth was based on what the numbers showed. I talked about these are the ratings, this is the revenue. Why do I say that? Because every one of us answer to somebody.
Now let's break this down, because this is where the real shade comes in. Stephen A. is essentially saying that when he negotiated his massive contract, he had the numbers to back it up. He had ratings, he had revenue, he had concrete evidence of his value to ESPN. The implication, of course, is that others might not have that same level of concrete evidence when they walk into contract negotiations. Reports suggest that Molly Qerim was earning approximately $500,000 annually, while Stephen A. Smith's deal averages around $20 million per year. When you look at those numbers, the pay disparity is absolutely staggering. We're talking about a 40-to-1 ratio between the show's lead host and its moderator. But here's where things get even more interesting. According to industry sources, ESPN allegedly offered Qerim a raise to somewhere between $1.50 and $2 million annually, which she reportedly deemed insufficient given her role in boosting First Take's ratings to all-time highs. Some reports even suggested she was seeking something closer to $8 million, feeling undervalued next to Stephen A.'s massive deal. The most damning part of Stephen A.'s podcast rant came when he delivered this warning.
But it can all evaporate in a snap if you lose perspective. And you forget that everybody, and I mean everybody, answers to somebody.
Think about the context here. His co-host just walked away from ESPN because she couldn't get the contract she wanted. And now Stephen A. is talking about how careers can evaporate in a snap if you lose perspective. The message is clear. Molly Qerim lost perspective, didn't understand her place in the hierarchy, and now her ESPN career has evaporated. But Stephen A. wasn't done twisting the knife. He followed up with this observation.
When I sat up there and I talked about what my worth was, it's because I knew I had leverage. Because I had other opportunities.
The implication here is devastating. Stephen A. is saying that the reason he was successful in his contract negotiations is because he had leverage. He had other opportunities, other networks that would pay him what he was worth. The subtext about Molly's situation is crystal clear. She didn't have that same leverage, she didn't have those same opportunities, and that's why she's no longer at ESPN. Media outlets and social media users immediately picked up on what they saw as Stephen A.'s thinly veiled critique of his former co-host. The hashtag #Stephen Throws Shade started trending on Twitter, with users dissecting every word of his podcast appearance and drawing connections between his general statements about leverage and Molly's specific situation. Now, I need to be fair here and point out that Stephen A. repeatedly emphasized throughout his rant that he wasn't specifically talking about Molly. He said variations of "I'm not talking about Molly" here multiple times during his podcast. But here's the thing about plausible deniability. It only works if the timing and context don't make the connection obvious. And in this case, the connection was so obvious that even casual observers were picking up on it. Commentary from industry insiders was swift and pointed. Former ESPN personalities like Emmanuel Acho criticized Stephen A.'s approach, calling his comments confusing and bizarre. The consensus among many was that Stephen A. was using his platform to send a message about his former co-host while maintaining just enough deniability to avoid direct confrontation. But the most damning interpretation of Stephen A.'s comments came from Marcellus Wiley, who suggested that Stephen A. might not have advocated for Molly during her contract negotiations. Think about about this for a moment. If you're working alongside someone for 10 years, if you're partners on what becomes the network's flagship show, wouldn't you want to ensure that your co-host is fairly compensated? Wouldn't you use your influence to help them get a better deal? According to some reports, there was an expectation that Stephen A., given his massive contract and influence at ESPN, would have advocated for Molly to receive better compensation. The fact that she ended up walking away from the network entirely suggests that either he didn't advocate for her or his advocacy wasn't effective. Now let's talk about the broader implications of what Stephen A. was saying in his podcast. He was essentially laying out his philosophy of how the entertainment industry works, how leverage operates, and how people should approach contract negotiations. But the subtext was unmistakable. He was positioning himself as someone who understood how to play the game correctly, while implying that others might not have that same understanding. The reaction on social media was immediate and intense. Fans and critics alike saw Stephen A.'s comments as a not-so-subtle lecture directed at his former co-host. Many pointed to the timing of his comments, coming just days after Molly's departure, as evidence that he was specifically addressing her situation despite his denials. Some of the harshest criticism came from those who felt that Stephen A. should have been more supportive of his longtime colleague. The argument was that after 10 years of working together, after building First Take into the juggernaut it became, Stephen A. should have had Molly's back, both privately during contract negotiations and publicly after her departure. But there's another layer to this story that makes Stephen A.'s comments even more controversial. Reports suggest that there had been ongoing tensions between Stephen A. and Molly on the show, including past on-air moments where their relationship seemed strained. Some observers noted instances where Molly had called out Stephen A.'s biases or challenged his takes in ways that seemed to go beyond normal professional disagreement. There were also reports of inappropriate comments Stephen A. had made about Molly on air, including jokes about her eating habits and personal life, which some suggested contributed to an uncomfortable working environment. While these incidents might have seemed minor at the time, they take on new significance when viewed through the lens of Molly's abrupt departure and Stephen A.'s subsequent comments. Industry sources began reporting that Fox Sports had already reached out to Molly Qerim about potential opportunities, with talks of a deal worth around $2 million over 3 years. This suggested that maybe, just maybe, Stephen A.'s assessment of leverage might have been wrong. Maybe Molly did have other options. Maybe she did have the leverage to walk away from ESPN, and maybe Stephen A.'s lecture about knowing your worth was misplaced. The irony is delicious. Here's Stephen A. Smith talking about how people need to understand leverage and have other opportunities before making bold moves in contract negotiations, while his former co-host appears to have done exactly that. She walked away from ESPN because she knew her worth, and almost immediately, competitors were knocking on her door with offers that validated her decision. The aftermath and what it reveals about sports media. Now that we've dissected the departure and analyzed the shade, it's time to look at what this entire saga reveals about the current state of sports media, the power dynamics at play, and what it means for the future of shows like First Take. Because this story isn't just about two personalities having a professional disagreement. It's a window into some of the most pressing issues facing the industry today. Let's start with the most obvious issue, the massive pay disparity between male and female hosts in sports media. When you look at the numbers, Stephen A. Smith making $20 million a year, while Molly Qerim was reportedly making around $500,000. You're looking at a 40-to-1 ratio. Even if you account for Stephen A. being the star of the show, even if you acknowledge his role as the primary draw, that level of disparity is difficult to justify when you consider Molly's contributions to the show's success. Think about what First Take was during Molly's tenure. This wasn't just Stephen A. Smith ranting into a camera. This was a carefully orchestrated debate show where the moderator played a crucial role in keeping discussions on track, asking insightful questions, and providing balance to the often over-the-top personalities. Molly didn't just facilitate debates. She often provided her own analysis and insights that added real value to the program. Under her stewardship as host, First Take became ESPN's flagship program, consistently drawing hundreds of thousands of viewers and generating significant revenue for the network. Yet when it came time for contract negotiations, the network apparently felt that her contributions were worth less than 5% of what they were paying Stephen A. Smith. But the pay disparity issue becomes even more complex when you consider the broader landscape of ESPN's female talent. On the same day that Molly's departure was announced, ESPN extended Malika Andrews' contract. This timing immediately led to speculation about whether there were different standards being applied to different personalities, and whether Molly's specific situation with Stephen A. Smith might have influenced how her contract negotiations were handled. Reports suggest that other female ESPN personalities like Mina Kimes are earning significantly more than what Molly was making, which raises questions about why someone who was hosting the network's top-rated show wasn't being compensated at a similar level. Was it because she was seen as replaceable flexible? Was it because her role was viewed as less important than those of her male counterparts? Or were there other factors at play? The situation becomes even more interesting when you consider Stephen A. Smith's role in all of this. Stephen A. isn't just the host of First Take, he's also an executive producer of the show. This means he had significant influence over the show's direction, its casting, and potentially even budget decisions. Given this level of influence, the question becomes, what role, if any, did he play in Molly's contract negotiations? Former colleagues like Marcellus Wiley have suggested that Stephen A. might not have advocated for Molly during her contract talks, despite their decade-long professional partnership. This raises uncomfortable questions about loyalty, professional relationships, and what responsibilities colleagues have to support each other in business negotiations. But let's dig deeper into the power dynamics at play here. Stephen A. Smith's massive contract, reported to be worth around $105 million over 5 years, gives him enormous leverage within ESPN. He's not just a host, he's essentially a franchise unto himself. His success has made him virtually untouchable within the network, and his influence extends far beyond just his own show. This level of power and influence creates a complex dynamic for anyone working alongside him. On one hand, being associated with Stephen A. Smith and First Take provides enormous exposure and career opportunities. On the other hand, it also means working in the shadow of someone whose success and compensation so dramatically outweigh your own that it's almost impossible to achieve any kind of parity. The way Stephen A. handled the aftermath of Molly's departure provides insight into how he views these power dynamics. His comments about leverage, about knowing your worth, about having the numbers to back up your value, these weren't just general observations about the industry. They were specific commentary on a situation involving someone he had worked with closely for 10 years. The subtext of his message was clear. I succeeded in my negotiations because I had leverage, because I had the numbers, because I understood my worth. The implication about Molly's situation was equally clear. She didn't have those same advantages, and that's why she's no longer at ESPN. But here's where Stephen A.'s assessment might have been wrong. Reports emerged that Fox Sports had already reached out to Molly with a potential offer worth around $2 million over 3 years. This suggests that maybe she did have leverage, maybe she did have other options, and maybe her decision to walk away from ESPN was actually a calculated business move rather than an emotional reaction to a bad contract offer. If that's the case, then Stephen A.'s lecture about understanding leverage and knowing your worth becomes even more problematic. He was essentially criticizing someone for making a bold business decision that might actually prove to be the right one. He was questioning her understanding of her own value while she was potentially in the process of proving that value in the marketplace. The reaction from fans and media personalities has been largely critical of Stephen A.'s handling of the situation. Many felt that after 10 years of working together, after building First Take into what it became, Stephen A. should have been more supportive of his former colleague, both privately and publicly. The criticism has been particularly harsh from those who feel that Stephen A. Goldberg's comments represented a pattern of behavior in sports media where successful personalities, particularly men, don't adequately support their colleagues, particularly women, when those colleagues are trying to advance their careers or improve their compensation. But this story also reveals something important about the current state of sports media more broadly. ESPN has been undergoing significant changes in recent years, with multiple rounds of layoffs, executive shakeups, and strategic shifts. The network has been forced to make difficult decisions about talent compensation as they navigate changing viewership patterns, cord cutting, and increased competition from streaming services and other platforms. ESPN's recent struggles with talent retention are well documented. In recent years, the network has lost high-profile personalities like Skip Bayless, Colin Cowherd, and Michelle Beadle, often to competing networks offering better compensation or more creative freedom. But what makes Molly's situation particularly interesting is how it exposes the challenges faced specifically by women in sports media. Despite significant progress in recent years, women still face unique obstacles in terms of compensation, advancement opportunities, and workplace dynamics. The fact that Molly was reportedly earning such a small fraction of what Stephen A. was making, despite being the host of the same show, highlights these ongoing disparities. Stephen A.'s comments about leverage and knowing your worth, coming in the context of his former co-host's departure, paint a picture of someone who views professional relationships primarily through the lens of business calculations and power dynamics. This isn't necessarily wrong. The entertainment industry is, after all, a business, but it does suggest a certain coldness in how Stephen A. approaches these relationships. The fact that he was willing to essentially critique Molly's business acumen publicly, even while claiming he wasn't specifically talking about her, suggests someone who prioritizes his own positioning over loyalty to former colleagues. The broader sports media community has taken notice of Stephen A.'s handling of this situation. Former colleagues and industry insiders have been critical of his approach, questioning whether someone in his position should be more supportive of colleagues who help contribute to his success. This could have implications for Stephen A.'s future relationships within the industry. If potential co-hosts or colleagues see how he handled Molly's departure, they might be more cautious about working with him or more demanding in their own contract negotiations, knowing that they can't necessarily count on his support if things go sideways. rise. There's also the question of Stephen A.'s broader brand and public image. His comments were widely interpreted as unnecessarily harsh towards someone who had been his professional partner for a decade. While Stephen A. has built his career on being outspoken and sometimes controversial, there's a difference between taking strong positions on sports topics and appearing to kick a colleague while they're down. The social media backlash to his comments was significant, with many users expressing disappointment in how he handled the situation. This could potentially impact his relationships with fans and his overall marketability, particularly if this becomes part of a pattern of behavior rather than a one-off incident. If you enjoyed watching this video, then go ahead and click on any of the cards on your screen for more.